If there was one thing Rick Dawson knew about dogs, it was that his had no business being in a galactic exhibition. Rufus, a 12-year-old golden retriever with thinning fur and a back leg that sometimes didn't cooperate when it rained, was hardly what anyone would call show material. He drooled on everything, refused to eat anything but peanut butter, and had a habit of barking at shadows. But when Rick's temporary employer, a biologist named Harza from the Trion cluster, saw Rufus chase off a wild hexaleaf critter that wandered into their research outpost, he declared the Earth dog a marvel of evolutionary loyalty and insisted on entering him into the Galactic Pet Show on Scavar Prime. "It showcases the most advanced companion species in the galaxy," Harza had said, his pale blue skin flushing lavender with excitement. "Imagine it, Rick. A dog your dog among the elite." Rick had tried to laugh it off. "He still eats crayons if I leave them out." Harza had not understood the humor. And that was how Rick ended up standing awkwardly on an anti-grav platform inside the Scavari Prime exhibition dome, surrounded by creatures that looked like sentient cloud clusters, molten goo, and beasts that could chew through reinforced carbon steel. Beside him, Rufus sat happily, tail wagging, tongue flopping out in a lopsided smile as he panted with unfiltered joy. "Do not lick the Uvale," Rick muttered, gently tugging Rufus away from a translucent worm-like being that appeared to quiver in discomfort. "Not everyone likes your enthusiasm, bud." A high chime signaled the beginning of the judging ceremony. A voice neither male nor female, more like a soft chorus of humming, echoed through the dome. "Welcome to the 51st Galactic Companion Species Exhibition. Please present your entrants." Presentations began in order of planetary affiliation. Some brought their companions in shining containers, others arrived with squads of handlers. One creature, a predator from the Ixon belt, stood 20 feet tall and wore ceremonial tusk bands. Its handler, a squat quadruped with emerald eyes, claimed it could detect psychic deception. "Do not be alarmed," he said in a soothing tone, right as the beast let out a bone-shaking roar that caused a group of gelatinous competitors to slide under the bleachers. When it came to Rick's turn, there was no container, no ceremony, just him, his dog, and a wagging tail. "This is Rufus," Rick announced, standing as tall as he could manage under the scrutiny of dozens of alien delegates. "He's a dog from Earth." A silence followed that was too long to be polite. Then a few murmurs rippled through the audience. One insectoid delegate tilted her head. "Function?" she asked. "Companion," Rick replied. "He helps with anxiety. Fetches things. Once pulled a kid out of a lake back home." More murmurs. "Does it do tricks?" "Sit," Rick said, and Rufus sat. The insectoid blinked. Rick scratched the back of his neck. "He also rolls over. Sometimes." They moved on quickly, no surprise there. By the end of the first day, Rick had mentally checked out. Rufus, however, was having the time of his life, tailing curious aliens and scarfing down snacks that Rick repeatedly warned could be sentient. That night, they were assigned lodging in Sector Blue, a small habitat dome shared with other low-ranking entrants. Rick sat on a cot, trying to understand the scoring system when the dome lights flickered. Rufus, curled at his feet, lifted his head and let out a low, uncertain growl. "Relax, boy," Rick said, rubbing his ears. "It's probably just—" The lights cut out completely. Then the screaming started. High-pitched wails, guttural roars, crashing sounds from the habitat next door. Rick jumped to his feet just as a shadow moved outside the dome wall, massive, swift, and wrong. A second later, the emergency light snapped on, casting everything in sharp red. A siren blared through the hallway. Security breach, containment failure, Sector Red compromised. All non-essential personnel evacuate. Rick's blood ran cold. He grabbed his comm link. "Harza? Harza, what's going on?" Static. Rufus barked sharply, ears perked, body tense. Something crashed through the adjacent habitat wall with a thunderous roar. Metal buckled. Something big was coming through. Rick didn't think. He ran. Down the hall, past blinking lights and fleeing competitors, heart pounding as he scanned for an exit route. Behind him, Rufus followed close, barking only once when a gelatinous creature oozed across the floor, clearly in panic. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with a group of terrified entrants, two Valorian twins clutching a screaming furball, a Kalex handler bleeding from a gash across his arm, and a Tazari noble trying to drag a boxy hover cage behind her. "What happened?" Rick asked, breathless. "Predators from Sector Red," the Tazari hissed. "Someone sabotaged the holding cages. They're loose." "How many?" "Too many. The Scatha are free." Rick's stomach flipped. Scatha. He remembered the name. The tusked thing from earlier, the one that could detect lies and crush steel. He looked around. No sign of any security bots. The evacuation must have pulled them elsewhere. "We can't stay here," Rick said. "Where's the nearest secure zone?" "Green Wing," the Kalex answered. 2 sectors over, but the main corridor's blocked." Rick chewed his lip. "There's a maintenance tunnel under this level. I saw it during the orientation." "Too narrow," the Tazari argued. "Not for us, and not for them if we move fast." The group hesitated. Then a low growl rolled down the hall. Rufus bristled. No more arguing. They ran. The maintenance tunnel was barely lit, just enough to reveal crates, wiring conduits, and abandoned tools. The group moved fast, stepping over debris and ducking under low beams. At one point, the Valorian twins dropped the furball pet and had to double back. Rick grabbed it, tucking it under one arm as it yipped. They'd almost made it halfway when Rufus stopped cold, hackles raised. Rick froze. "What is it, boy?" From a vent ahead, something thumped. Hard. Rick motioned for the group to hold. He crept forward, Rufus at his side. Another thump. Then the vent cover burst outward and a Scatha slammed into the tunnel, snarling, eyes like molten copper. It spotted the group. Roared. The Valorian twins screamed. Rick stepped forward, heart hammering. And then Rufus did something that stunned everyone. He barked, loud, sharp, authoritative. Then he stepped forward and growled, a low, resonant growl that seemed far too powerful for his aging lungs. The Scatha paused. Rufus took another step. The alien predator blinked, tilted its head. Then Rick understood. The Scatha's strength came with a flaw. It was bred for deception detection, not unpredictability. And nothing on Scaverer Prime had trained it for an old Earth dog, challenging it to a showdown. Rufus lunged not to attack but to distract. He darted past the beast, nipping at its heels, barking with wild intensity. "Move!" Rick shouted, ushering the group forward. The Scatha snarled and spun after Rufus, giving the rest of them just enough time to sprint past. Behind them, Rick heard the echo of claws on metal, the scuffle of fur, the sound of a plastic chew toy getting bitten in half. Rufus was playing tag with a nightmare. They reached the end of the tunnel, a blast door marked maintenance exit. Rick jammed his access chip into the panel. Nothing. "Manual override," the Kalex barked. "There." He pointed to a crank lever. Rick lunged for it, started turning. Behind them, Rufus came bounding back around the corner, muddy, panting, missing a chunk of fur on his side but still grinning like he'd just finished a good game of chase. The Scatha wasn't far behind. The crank creaked. Door open enough for one. "Go!" Rick yelled. One by one, they slid through the gap. The Kalex pulled the Tazari through with brute strength. Rick went last, Rufus right behind him. The Scatha lunged just as Rick pulled the lever back. The door slammed shut with a bone-jarring bang. Silence. Then Rufus sat down, licked his paw, and farted. Rick leaned against the wall, exhausted. The others stared at Rufus like he was some kind of warrior spirit. Harza's voice finally crackled through Rick's comlink. "Rick, You're alive. The situation's under control. Where are you? Rick looked at Rufus. We're fine, he said. And I think your science entry might have just saved a few dozen lives. Arza was quiet for a moment. Is this typical Earth dog behavior? Rick laughed tiredly. No, but it's definitely Rufus behavior. By morning, Sector Blue was sealed off and crawling with emergency response teams. White-shelled drones scurried across shattered flooring, sniffing for biological traces, while cleanup bots scraped gouges from the walls. Judging at the Galactic Pet Show was suspended indefinitely. Officials didn't call it a terror event. Not yet. But the whispered phrase, targeted sabotage, ran through the crowd like static in a comms unit. Rick and Rufus sat behind a cordoned-off area in the debrief zone, sipping nutrient broth and water respectively. Well, Rick sipped. Rufus slurped, sneezed, then tried to eat the cup. Across from them, a Tazari medical officer scanned Rick's left arm, where the Skaha's claws had scraped him during the final dash. The wound was superficial, no tendons hit, no nerve damage, but he'd need antibiotics and a dermal regrowth patch for a week minimum. No showboating. No lifting with that arm. No running. She emphasized that twice. You're lucky, she said, voice clipped. If that thing had connected deeper, you'd be in reconstruction surgery right now. Rick winced as she sprayed the wound with a neural-numbing mist. Yeah. Feels lucky. Rufus let out a small whine, sensing Rick's tension. The officer looked at him, scanned, then paused. Did he sustain injury? He lost some fur, maybe bruised a rib or two, Rick replied. But he's walking fine. I'll have our vet run full scans back home. She gave him a look that hovered between disbelief and muted awe. You were telling me this creature engaged a Skatha without armor, augmentation, or tactical instruction? Rick shrugged. He used to chase raccoons. Honestly, this wasn't that different. Before she could respond, a low chime rang out, followed by the smooth voice of exhibition director Sen Trava, a golden-hued being with bioluminescent streaks across his cheeks and the patience of a stone sculpture. Mr. Dawson, he said, approaching, may we speak privately? Rick stood slowly, nodding. Rufus trailed behind, tail low, instincts sharp. They followed the director through a security checkpoint and into a smaller conference pod overlooking the exhibition dome, now empty and quiet, except for repair bots and a few sulking creatures refusing to evacuate until refunds were negotiated. Sen folded his hands. You saved lives. Yours and your pet's actions prevented a catastrophe. I'm just glad we all made it out. You do understand that by Exhibition Regulation 484.8b, any contestant directly involved in an active incident must be reevaluated. Rick hesitated. You mean disqualified? Sen's glowing eyes dimmed slightly. Not necessarily. Given the circumstances, the panel has reconsidered Rufus's role. In fact, many see his actions as representative of an extraordinary attribute, which is altruistic bravery, unconditioned by command input. Rick blinked. You mean he wasn't told to help, he just did it? Sen nodded. Precisely. None of our AI companions are capable of such irrational, spontaneous protection. The other contestants operate under genetic directives, loyalty protocols, behavioral mapping. But Rufus, he simply chose. Rick looked down at his dog, who was currently chewing something that might have been the remains of a judge's ceremonial ribbon. I didn't train him for any of this, Rick said. He just knows people need help. Sinan sat back. There's a problem, however. The sabotage wasn't random. The Skatha holding cells were encrypted. Only high-level access could have overridden them. Someone used the show as cover for a targeted release. Rick frowned. You think this was about someone specific? We believe it may have been a competitor or sponsor, attempting to discredit or eliminate others. And your dog ruined that plan. Rick leaned back, feeling a dull pulse in his bandaged arm. Sen tapped a command into the console. The screen flickered on, displaying surveillance footage, grainy, shaky, but clear enough. Rufus was darting between corridors, barking, nipping at ankles, forcing the massive scatha to chase him in the opposite direction from the fleeing competitors. Rick exhaled. "That's my boy." The director continued. "We're relaunching the competition tomorrow with tightened security. Due to the emergency, several high-tier contestants have withdrawn. Because of safety? Because they're embarrassed. The galaxy's most advanced bioengineered beasts were outperformed by a saggy-muzzled dog who eats napkins." Rick chuckled, then stopped. "Wait, you're still going to let us compete?" "Not just that," Sen said, standing. "You've been moved into the ambassador tier." Rick stared. "Is that good?" "It's the highest level, reserved for species that demonstrate not just utility but philosophical depth. Your companion acted without incentive. Some of our panelists consider that the hallmark of moral evolution." Rick looked down at Rufus. The dog belched, then lay down with his nose on Rick's foot. "Are we sure he's not just confused?" Sen turned to leave. "Prepare for the next round, Mr. Dawson. Your dog has changed the game." By midday the following rotation, the dome was filled again, smaller crowd, but buzzing with nervous energy. Security drones hovered at every junction. The pets were kept in sealed display fields unless actively participating. Rick felt like a kid who'd wandered into the finals of a science fair by accidentally setting off the fire alarm in regionals. He stood beside Rufus on a rotating display platform, while a panel of 12 judges, all from different species, took notes, ran sensor sweeps, and watched playback footage of the scatha incident from 5 angles. One judge, a floating cube of refracted light, asked Rick how many years of formal instruction Rufus had received. "None," Rick said. "I mean, he learned sit when he was 2, but that was with bacon." The cube spun in a slow circle. "And yet he intercepted a Class V apex predator with no external prompting." Rick glanced at Rufus, who was now licking his own leg and seemed very pleased with himself. "Look, I don't want to tell you your scoring system's broken, but maybe your scoring system's broken." There were no tricks this round, no obstacle courses or simulated rescues. Instead, each remaining competitor was observed during stress simulation trials. The judges watched for bonding behavior, spontaneous interaction, and adaptability. One contestant, a sleek chrome-scaled avian from the planet Zarnak, solved a maze while mimicking its owner's speech patterns. Another mimicked empathy through thermal pulses. Then it was Rufus's turn. They placed Rick and Rufus in a clear, circular chamber and simulated a power loss. The lights dimmed, mechanical hums went silent, low rumbles played over the speakers. Rick sat quietly. Rufus trotted to him, sniffed his hand, then curled into his lap, pushing against his chest with a small whine. Then the simulation escalated. A high-pitched wail, a loud bang, a rising scent, fake smoke, but still acrid. Rufus stood, ears alert, body angled between Rick and the source of the noise. Not attacking, not panicking, just shielding. After 10 seconds, the simulation ended, the lights returned. Rufus didn't move until Rick exhaled. The judges said nothing, but Rick saw something change in their eyes, or photoreceptors, or whatever passed for eyes in those strange heads. Later, back in the preparation dome, Rick tended to a fresh patch of chafing on Rufus's back leg. The dog had overexerted himself. The Tazari vet had warned him earlier, no running for a few days. The muscle strain wasn't dangerous, but rest was vital. Dogs his age didn't bounce back in hours. Rick wrapped the leg with a cooling sleeve. "You hear that, buddy? You've got to take it easy. Doctor's orders." Rufus wagged once, as if to acknowledge the complaint, then flopped sideways with a heavy sigh. The door chimed. Harza stepped in, flanked by 2 embassy officials. "I saw the broadcast," Harza said. "Rufus has become a symbol of organic instinct. You're trending across 5 systems. The term dogged defense has entered the Scavaray lexicon." Rick shook his head. "He's just a tired dog. who did what he thought he had to. Harza glanced at the cooling sleeve. Will he recover in time for the final exhibition? Not if he keeps getting dragged into political metaphors. One of the officials stepped forward. Mr. Dawson, if he's medically cleared, we'd like to present Rufus during the closing ceremony. Rick frowned. For what? Award recognition, cultural diplomacy, symbolic unity. Rick looked at his dog, who was now snoring with his paw covering one eye. You really want to parade him in front of the galaxy like that? He may have earned it, Harza said softly. And perhaps so have you. Rick didn't respond right away. He looked at the wrapped leg, the old eyes, the exhausted body of the dog who'd once pulled his niece from a creek back on Earth, who barked at every thunderstorm, who whimpered in his sleep after long walks, who had just outsmarted a nightmare predator in a corridor designed for maintenance droids. Only if he's feeling up to it, Rick said at last, and only if there are snacks involved. Rufus lifted his head slightly. At the word snacks, his tail gave a slow, lazy wag. 2 days later, the exhibition dome glittered like a gemstone against the black velvet of space. The closing ceremony was set for the final rotation of the Scaver solar cycle, and this time, no one underestimated the Earth Dog. Rufus had become something of a phenomenon, his bark immortalized in memes, his chase scene reenacted by avatars and digital simulators, his old fur compared by alien commentators to the noble lichen of Parnvi's winter cliffs. Rick hadn't slept much. Between vet checkups, security briefings, and politely refusing multiple offers to license Rufus's DNA for adaptive clone pets, he barely had time to eat. And when he did, Rufus always got the better half. You're not even supposed to have Zenth grain muffins, Rick muttered as he watched Rufus nibble one from a plate left out by an overzealous fan. The vet's update had come early that morning. Mild fatigue, some lingering muscle strain, but no sign of underlying trauma. Light activity only, she said firmly, nothing longer than 5 minutes. If he pants heavily, stop immediately, and don't forget his joint supplement. Rick had nodded, memorized the instructions, then triple-checked Rufus's walking boot. They were ready, or so he thought. The closing ceremony was a whirlwind of lights, multilingual fanfare, and dignitaries from systems Rick had only ever heard of in galactic news feeds. Sin Trava, ever radiant in his pale gold suit, hovered above the center stage as names were announced, honors distributed, and finalists called to stand before the grand display panel. Rick stood behind Rufus, gently adjusting his chest strap. Around them, other owners guided their companions into place, levitating serpents, silk-feathered avians, insectile dancers that shimmered with empathy pulses. Rufus just yawned. Sun raised his hand. This year, he began, we were reminded that greatness does not always arrive with ceremony or genetic optimization. Sometimes it arrives wagging its tail, nosing a snack pouch, and doing what it believes is right, because rightness for some is instinct. The crowd stirred. Cameras pivoted. Sen gestured toward Rick and Rufus. We present the honored companion of the Cycle Award to Rufus of Earth. A deep chime sounded. Lights bathed them in a soft halo. Rufus tilted his head, then sneezed. Rick leaned down. You're being watched by 50 species. Try not to throw up. But Rufus didn't throw up. He sat quietly, ears up, tail tapping the platform once. He looked out at the dome, at the applause in whatever form it came, ripples in the air, bioluminescent bursts, pheromone clouds that Rick hoped weren't toxic, and let it all wash over him like a spring breeze. That might have been the end of it. It wasn't, because as the ceremony shifted to its finale, a celebratory release of peace doves from the moons of Thalus, genetically designed to emit calming harmonics, the dome's temperature sensors triggered a warning. An internal security officer appeared on Rick's private display. Mr. Dawson, are you with your animal? Rick blinked. Yeah? We're detecting biometric interference near your platform. Please verify if your companion has interacted with any foreign devices. Rick frowned and looked down at Rufus. The dog hadn't moved. His sensors were clear. But nearby, just past the display riser, one of the other contestants' hoverpods began to spark. Then it exploded. The shockwave wasn't lethal. It was small, precise, but it knocked two handlers backward and shattered part of the dome's eastern arch. Alarms blared. Protective shielding surged into place. Chaos returned. Rick dropped low and covered Rufus. Security bots swarmed. One of the finalists screamed that their pet was gone, vanished in the smoke. Rick coughed, eyes stinging. The lights dimmed again. Someone had sabotaged the ceremony. Not like before. This time it was about sending a message. A second pod, unattended, seemingly decorative, shuddered. Rick saw the arc of energy coil at its base. No one else had noticed yet. He stood, grabbing Rufus's harness. "Come on, bud. I know the vet said no running, but we don't have a choice." He pushed through the smoke and noise, heading for the pod. Behind him, alien staff barked orders, delegates scrambled for exits, and emergency lights cycled red. Rick reached the pod and ripped its casing open. Inside was a crudely installed energy surge pack, set to trigger in less than 30 seconds. He turned to run. Rufus didn't. The dog had spotted something moving away through the haze, a small figure with a satchel and deliberate steps, trying not to draw attention. Rufus barked. The figure flinched. Rick followed his gaze, saw the retreating saboteur, and hesitated just long enough for the charge behind him to start pulsing. Too late to disarm. "Go!" Rick yelled. He shoved Rufus forward and threw himself back, just as the second explosion rocked the dome's floor. Rick woke in a medical bay an hour later, ribs bandaged, left leg in a brace, a mild concussion, 2 cracked ribs and a sprained knee. Nothing surgical, but the doctor insisted on a week of rest minimum and no weight-bearing activity for at least 3 days. He groaned, blinking through the white haze of the ceiling. "Rufus? He's here." Harza stepped into view, his eyes soft, arms crossed. "He's okay?" "Tired. Singed a bit of fur. Vet says he tore a ligament in that back leg, probably from pivoting too fast while chasing the saboteur. But he'll recover. 6 weeks minimum with hydrotherapy. He's already taken to the water tank, loves it." Rick chuckled, despite the pain. "That dog hates baths." "Apparently not, when they come with floating bacon-scented toys." Rick let out a slow breath. "Was anyone hurt?" "No fatalities. Minor injuries. And thanks to your intervention, the second charge didn't hit anyone directly." Rick closed his eyes. The saboteur? Caught. Security used Rufus's pursuit footage to identify her. She was an off-world radical from a group that believes AI and gene-engineered pets are the only acceptable life forms for companionship. She viewed your entry as a cultural threat. Rick blinked. "You're telling me someone tried to bomb a pet show because my dog was too natural?" Harza nodded solemnly. "Organic loyalty doesn't fit everyone's ideology." Rick rolled his eyes. "I can't believe this." Harza stepped aside. Rufus limped into view, back leg lightly braced, tongue hanging out. He whined and nudged Rick's arm. "Hey, buddy," Rick whispered, reaching with his uninjured hand. "They're saying we might be too dangerous for galactic events." Rufus licked his face. The closing ceremony resumed 2 rotations later, this time under even stricter surveillance, and with no live tech on the main floor. Gentrava addressed the galaxy from a quiet platform. "We began this exhibition with a belief in mastery, in the marvels of our own design. But we end it reminded of something deeper, that loyalty, courage, and love are not functions, they are choices." He gestured toward the small pedestal at the center. A sculpture had been erected, a simple form of a dog, sitting, head tilted slightly. Not stylized, not regal, just a replica of Rufus. Beside it, the words, "Companion, Defender, Friend." Sen turned to Rick, who stood supported by crutches. Rufus sat beside him, tail flicking gently. "Mr. Dawson, The Galactic Committee would like to offer Earth a seat in the Companion Species Council. As a permanent representative, would you accept? Rick didn't speak right away. He looked at Rufus, scratched behind his ears, and said, "As long as we don't have to wear matching uniforms." The crowd laughed, light, respectful, genuine. Chen extended a hand. "Welcome to the council." And so, among the biotech wonders and sentient swarms of the galaxy, an old golden retriever limped onto history's stage, not because he could fly or solve puzzles or project holograms, but because when chaos erupted, he simply stood by his person. No protocol, no programming. His heart. Rufus's limp had improved slightly by the time the Earth delegation arrived at the Companion Species Council headquarters, a ringed station orbiting a pale violet star in neutral space. The station had no weapons, no military docks, only gardens, reflection chambers, and meeting halls that looked more like arboretums than places of governance. Rick didn't know what he expected as a newly appointed representative, but so far it involved a lot of nodding, sipping strange teas, and explaining why dogs sniffed each other's backsides. The council was fascinated. The idea that a species developed companionship not from need or programming, but from a co-evolution of affection was still radical here. "They form emotional contracts without ceremony?" one delegate asked during the first assembly. "They choose devotion?" "They do," Rick replied, glancing down at Rufus, who was snoozing beside his chair with a comfort pillow tucked under his good leg. "And what do they receive in return?" Rick thought about that for a moment. "We give them everything we can, but they'd love us even if we didn't." That had silenced the chamber. Later that evening, Rick wandered through one of the station's oxygen gardens, letting Rufus sniff the strangely sweet-smelling moss and glowing leaf drips that pulsed like jellyfish in the low light. The medical team had adjusted the gravity to be lighter, easier on his leg. Every now and then, Rufus would stop, stare at something moving in the distance, and wag his tail. "I'm not sure what I'm doing here," Rick said aloud, running a hand through his hair. "Ambassador to doghood? Galactic friendship liaison?" Rufus responded with a low chuff and a gentle headbutt to Rick's shin. "I guess I just thought life would go back to normal after the show," Rick added. It hadn't, not even close. Since the award ceremony, Earth had been inundated with inquiries. Half the galaxy wanted to meet more dogs, while the other half wanted to license Rick's training philosophy. He tried explaining there wasn't a philosophy. Rufus had learned from people, and people had learned from him. That was the whole point. Back in his quarters, he found a message waiting. It was from Centraba. "Rick, we're holding a closed vote tomorrow. A proposal has emerged to expand companion classifications beyond engineered species. If it passes, Earth's animals may be eligible as officially recognized sentient affinitive companions. That means legal protection, diplomatic consideration, and even interspecies travel rights. This is because of your dog. Just thought you should know." Rick stared at the message for a long time. Then he reached down and gently scratched behind Rufus's ears. "You've started something, buddy." The vote passed. It wasn't unanimous, but it was overwhelming. For the first time in interstellar history, naturally evolved non-augmented species were acknowledged as full companions with legal standing. It meant no more scanning dogs like cargo at ports. It meant recognition of emotional value. It meant respect. But not everyone celebrated. Some saw it as a threat to artificial companions. Others claimed Earth animals were too unpredictable. A few scoffed that the galaxy was caving to sentiment. Rick didn't care. He'd seen how the frightened Calyx child had clung to Rufus after the explosion, how the Tazari handler, usually so stiff, had silently slipped a piece of fruit to him with trembling fingers, how Rufus had wagged his tail each time like it was the most normal thing in the universe. He had watched his old dog become a symbol without trying, not because he was special, but because he was good. 3 weeks later, Rick finally returned to Earth. The transport ship descended into the Mojave landing basin just after sunset, casting long shadows across the runway. Rufus was curled on a padded mat beside Rick, his leg now free of the brace but still stiff. The vet had warned them he was old, recovery would be slow, and long walks were a thing of the past. But the ligament had healed properly. He was just a senior now, and that was fine. As they stepped onto Earth's soil, Rufus sniffed the wind. Then he sneezed and sneezed again, catching the scent of a mesquite bush and someone grilling nearby. Rick laughed. Home. Waiting for them was Rick's sister, a former rescue volunteer, who burst into tears the moment she saw them. Rufus gave her a tired tail wag, then promptly rolled over and begged for a belly rub. "You turned into a celebrity while we were gone," she whispered, still scratching his stomach. "You even made the president's address." Rick chuckled. "He still eats paper if I don't watch him." Reporters tried to get statements, but Rick declined interviews. He had one final stop to make before any of that. They drove up to a quiet lake just outside town, the same one where Rufus had pulled a neighbor's child from the water 6 years ago. The dock was still there. So was the willow tree where Rick used to throw sticks. They sat for an hour, maybe more. Rick didn't check his comm once. As stars blinked into view, he spoke quietly. "They wanted to keep you out of the exhibition, you know. Said you weren't engineered, not enhanced, said you were too old." Rufus lifted his head. "They called you unremarkable, and then you chased a monster down a hallway and saved aliens who'd never even heard of a chew toy." Rufus blinked, yawned, and laid his head on Rick's boot. You reminded them that kindness doesn't need upgrades, that courage doesn't always roar, sometimes it limps, but it shows up anyway. Rick wiped at his eyes. "You did good, old man." Behind them, lights from the town flickered gently across the lake. Crickets chirped. Rufus shifted, letting out a sleepy sigh. They didn't need fireworks, or awards, or speeches. They had this quiet evening, a warm breeze, and the kind of loyalty that didn't need translation.